Okay, before we start, I want to take a minute and give us a little bit of time to introduce ourselves, actually. So I already introduced myself. What you're going to do this is we're going to complete an inclusion activity. In the middle of your table, when you came in, you probably noticed there was this weird random roll of toilet paper. We are going to use that for the inclusion activity. And so what you're going to do is just grab the toilet paper, take off however much you think you might need, and pass it to a friend. And then once everyone has some toilet paper, you're just going to look back up here. Okay, so once you have your toilet paper, what you're going to do with that is at a table you all are going to take turns, doesn't matter who starts, and for each square that you decided you were going to take off the roll, you have to tell your table one thing about you. So for each individual square, share one piece of information about yourself with your table mates. I'm going to give you a few minutes to go around the tables and give everyone a chance to share. Okay, hopefully you have had an opportunity to share out, learn a couple things. I also just want to give us a chance to introduce ourselves to the room, just so we can kind of see what schools are here. I know that we know what grade levels based on where we're sitting, but just a quick hi, hello. I want you guys to be able to use these sessions as networking also, because you're all in kind of a similar place in your career. And I know that you talk within buildings and within grade levels a lot, but it's also really good to talk between buildings and between grade levels. And so my K2 people yesterday did a lot of changing emails and kind of networking that way so they could support each other if someone had a great idea. So just take a quick second. You can start because you're my doppelganger. Not my doppelganger. My friend's doppelganger, if you don't mind.
I'm Shannon. I'm at Bethel. It's my first year.
You're Shannon. I was at Bethel before I took this position, so I was like, I wonder who she is. Now I might remember your name.
Okay.
I'm Carrie. I'm doing 4th grade at Burr Elementary.
I'm Maria. I'm doing 4th grade math and science at Patriots.
Sure.
I'm Zach. I'm 3rd grade at Whittington Hills.
I'm Tori. I'm 3rd grade at Wolf Meadow.
I'm Sydney. I'm 5th grade at Warren College.
I'm Brianna. I'm 5th grade at Patriots.
I'm Josh. I'm 5th grade at Harrisburg.
I'm Mary. I'm 5th grade at Charles E. Boger.
I'm Leanne. I'm 3rd grade at Patriots, and I just moved here about 2 months ago, so everything's very new.
I'm Hannah. I'm 3rd grade at Burr.
I'm Sarah. I'm 3rd grade at Urban.
Awesome. So as we move throughout the day, feel free, and I encourage you to kind of change email addresses if you notice that you and someone else have some things in common or some ideas that you want to share. Before we start, I just kind of want to show you what the Canvas course looks like. So we're going to use the same Canvas course the whole time. Once I switch it over, so right now it's public because I do have some new teachers that are new moving here that do not have their logins and things like that. Once I switch it to enroll codes, I will let you know, and I'll update the enroll code and send it out to you guys. It has both the math and the ELA, and the reason is exactly what you were talking about, Josh. So you are now teaching everything. That is the case for many, many people. Maybe not so much in 4th and 5th grade in a lot of buildings. I think mostly, though, in most buildings, a lot of them have chosen to do that as well. And so we wanted you, even though you were not getting that ELA support because that went to our BT1s and our first-year teachers, to still have access to the resources and the information. So some of us that are in the room may have never taught ELA before, and you now are. Some of us may just want that. So everything that Heidi is doing with her first-year teachers is housed in that ELA button, and you can go and access it, see all the same stuff. So if there's something that interests you, then it is there for your information. All of our stuff obviously will be in the math button. Once I click in the math button, this course overview is going to tell you anything you need to know in terms of I forgot what time or what location or what day. It also gives you your care code, which needs to be put in by October 1st. So you will get care credit for it. Once October 1st hits, the care window will close. So just make sure you go and you log in sometime between now and then. Our general course over our outcomes for the entire 5 sessions. So we have 5 face-to-face sessions and then 1 online activity that happens. Doing those, we're going to talk about routines and procedures for workshop. Look at ways to have student-centered instruction. Talk about the connection between procedural and conceptual fluency and understanding and how all of that connects and supports each other. Talk about purposeful questions, which I know that we worked on a bit last year as well as a district, and how that we can best facilitate mathematical discourse in our classroom, because I know that sometimes that's a big deal, right? Ask a question, students go, I don't know. right? So how do I support their ability to have mathematical discourse? And then thinking about formative assessment and what ways can I assess students in a workshop, and what opportunities do I have, and how does that look both formally and informally? So that's kind of what we're going to do throughout the course of the year. If you forget where we need to be, here are all of our dates. So next time I see you will be September 28th, and we will be right back here in facilities. So now you've done it once, you can see how to get here. You guys will see me on December 6th. The one that's split like this, it will tell you which day. And then, so I think we stayed between here and Echo. If it says Echo and you haven't been there, it's in the Ed Center and it's upstairs. But there will be signs and there will be people to help and direct you. So this is just in case you forget anything, or you just want to pre-plan, or all of those things for the schedule. If I go back, the course we're going to live in today is the overview of math workshop. So today we're really going to just really define math workshop and what it is and what it involves. We're also going to think about the components of math workshop and what really needs to be happening in my class, and think about what strategies are best available to support what I want my students to be able to do in workshop. We're going to take a look at the critical areas of math so that we can best support our students in what is determined to be a critical area in math, and then develop an understanding of CPA. So CPA is in our Common Instructional Framework. Some of us have more familiarity than others. Some of us have seen it in the Common Instructional Framework, but we have some better supporting documents now, so we're going to spend some time living in that because that's a big push as well. Before I do anything else, are there any questions? Okay. The other thing before I start that I forgot to say, the class, all of these sessions are really malleable. So I want you guys to come in and feel like it was valuable and you got something out of it and you left with something. So the titles are in there. That doesn't mean we can't change them. So if we as a group determine, you know what, the 3-5 teachers really need this more and we want to have that session instead, all you guys have to do is give me that feedback and we can do that. As we go through the sessions, if you're like, I have too much, you gave me too much planning time within that session or not enough, we can change that. So I just want you to know that this is not just come in and listen to me talk and leave because you have to. I really don't want to waste anyone's time. I want it to, I'm pulling you out of your room 2 of these days, right? So I'm taking you away from students. If I'm doing that, then I want to be giving you something that makes it worth your time to be away from your students. Does that make sense? So I want you guys to be really, really open and brutally honest about that. So if there's things you don't like, please tell me, because if you don't tell me, I'm probably going to do it again, and then you're going to have to sit through it again, and you don't want to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is just reflect a little bit. You are in your second year, which means you have some experience. You've student taught. Sorry, I'm going to try not to make that reference. I apologize. But you do still have experience, right? So you've done some student teaching. You've seen some classrooms. You've had time to kind of build kind of your own idea of what math workshop is. And so I just want you to take a minute thinking about your current knowledge level and whatever you can draw from in that, whether that's your college studies, your student teaching, your experience in the classroom on your own, and just in the answer garden, if you click in the thing and type, just type in 2 or 3 things that you think really kind of define math workshop and what that is. Okay, so if you take a look at the answer garden, the more words get put in that are similar, which we didn't have a lot of similarities because we kind of reworded some things, and that's fine too. But if you use it in your classroom, I just kind of want to give you each of the things that I do throughout the day. I try and think of things that you could also implement. So if I'm doing it, it's because I feel like we could also talk about how could that look in a classroom. So if you do choose to use Answer Garden in a classroom, it's super easy to do. The more the same word gets put in, the bigger it gets. So it kind of acts like Wordle if you're familiar with Wordles. So you can kind of do that in your classroom and look for similarities. What do we notice? What are the commonalities across the class that people believe? In ours, you guys did some great stuff, but no one worded anything the same, which is fine. So math workshop involves centers, right? Student-centered instruction. Teacher conferencing, I love that, because a lot of times we like to think about conferencing as an ELA thing. And really, I also hope that by the end of this course and throughout the course of this year, that we start to realize that ELA and math workshop really are not that different. They're very similar. And if we start applying some of the things we've been doing in ELA to math, then it will really, really help. And I think that we've kind of gotten stuck, not we as in you guys, we as in society, have gotten stuck in this really rigid old school I'm going to stand up and teach you the math, and I'm going to give you something to do, and we need to start changing our mindset, moving away from that, and moving into, I'm not going to just give you information, I'm going to support you developing your thinking of information, and I'm going to facilitate it. So I'm kind of moving away from teaching, right, to facilitating, and that will help that. Strategies, guided practice. So all of this stuff, if you take a look, hopefully is stuff that also matches those other session names. So we have a session name for student-centered instruction. We have a session about strategies. In this session, we're going to talk about mini lessons and small groups and all those things. So hopefully along the course, most of this will get covered. We can revisit it at the end in the final session and think about, okay, let's brainstorm what else we need to cover so that we can make sure that at the end everyone feels good about it. The last piece before we really, really dive in today is to take a look at this Likert scale. If you click on it, it's going to open in the same window, unfortunately, because I could not, for the life of me, get my open a new window to work in HTML for this one. I don't know why. So just know that you're going to have to click the back button to get back to the Canvas course. Don't close the window. What I want you to do is just think about where you are on the continuum. It does not matter where you are. I will not know who stars is whose, and neither will anyone else. But I think reflecting on our practice is what helps us grow. And so it is okay to be anywhere on that continuum, no matter if you're in year 1 or year 15. I want you to drag the blue star, not the pink one for right now, the blue star, just click it, drag it, and just put it where you feel you are on this continuum in terms of your confidence level and implementation of Math Workshop and how effective you are and all of those things. Because in order for us to really move forward and learn more, we have to know where we are currently. Okay, so if we take a look at the scale, you can kind of tell that in the room we have a wide variety of people who feel in different places along that continuum. That's great, because that means that we have a lot of people that can support one another, and we can do some good talking and sharing of ideas and strategies. So I think that's fabulous. We're going to come back to it at the end and see if anything changed. For now, we're going to do a quick turn and talk. I want you to take a look at the picture and think about times that you have perhaps driven on a highway similar to that, maybe today, to get here. And I want you to just kind of think about, you weren't always able to do that. It's not like you just woke up, got in a car, and drove, right? So there were some things you had to do to be able to get in your car and drive. And so I just want you to do a turn and talk at your table and think through the process of how it is that you are now able to do that. Because we know that you have to be able to drive pretty much in today's world to function. Maybe you could get a job close to your house if there's something in walking distance, but in general, that's a skill everyone has to have. And so how is it that you came to have that skill? Does that make sense? So just turn and talk to an elbow partner and just kind of talk about that process and what it looked like for you. At your tables, what kinds of things did you talk about? How were you able to be able to drive down that highway?
Start practicing in the car.
Okay.
We talked about how you can watch someone drive all you want, but that's not going to teach you how to drive. I mean, it shows you good practices and habits of driving and safe driving, but until you get in the car, you really don't learn where to put your foot and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
You said that, like, it's like a
I do.
I do, we do, you do thing. So, like, you go to driver's ed, that I do, I show you everything how to do, and then you go out and have your permit, and then you do it by yourself and you get your license.
Yeah, so literally, she read my notes before she got here. That's really what my notes said, right? So I put the same thing, and I know you made that connection too immediately. She's connecting this to math, obviously. Yes. So we could take the driver's ed course. Someone tells us a bunch of stuff. That's kind of like the mini lesson, right? Like I'm kind of facilitating, but you're not really doing a whole lot on your own or even with me at that point. I'm kind of sharing some information, maybe talking about the strategies, maybe practicing them, but it's really when I get into those guided groups, right, when I'm sitting in the car with the driver's ed teacher and I'm practicing, I'm getting that immediate feedback and I'm getting some constructive points and I'm really doing it, right, with some guidance, that I'm able to then get my permit, go to my independent practice, right, learn from myself, learn from others, make my own mistakes, push the gas pedal too hard, right? My son pushed the brake pedal too hard the other day. My husband said at least it was a brake pedal. And then, you master it and you get your license. And so it looks really similar. And so we have to think about all those pieces are important and they all work together to be able to get students to that level of mastery that we want to see. So in order for us to do that, we really need to have a good understanding of what those critical areas are for students, which is where we're going to spend some time right now. So you can click on the 3-5 button. And in here are all of the critical areas for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade according to the North Carolina Department of Education, Department of Instruction, sorry. And so I want you guys at your tables to take a moment, read over them either individually, together, whatever you're comfortable with. And I want you to think about, as you're reading them, those questions that are underneath the chart. So what do you notice about the critical areas at each grade level? So what do you notice about the 3rd grade ones, the 4th grade ones, the 5th grade ones? And it doesn't matter what grade you're in. I want you to read all of them. What do the critical areas have in common across 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade? What do you see that they all have? And then what conclusions could you draw about the critical areas? Okay, so I'm going to give you about 3 to 5 minutes, longer if we need it, to just look over those and kind of think about those 3 questions and have a conversation, if you would like, about what you're noticing in those commonalities. Okay, so hopefully you've had an opportunity to have a little bit of discussion. I mostly want to focus on that second bullet. So at your tables and as you looked through those critical areas, what commonalities did you all notice?
We build on each other, and I mean, if you don't have the babies in 3rd grade, you're not going to be able to do the next thing in 4th grade.
Okay. Anything else that you noticed that was similar across grade levels?
The language used is always like this idea of developing, continuing, and the idea that you're never done learning. You're just going to keep going.
Yep, and you'll see that a lot, especially in a lot of the new standards that were rolled out and in a lot of the new unit titles that we talk a lot about developing, we talk a lot about modeling now. How about content? Is there anything that's similar about the content across grade levels?
Fractions.
I see fractions, geometry, and the multiplication and division, right? So really what it comes down to is in all 3 grade levels, we come up with basically the same 3 categories. There's whole numbers, fractions and decimals, and geometry. And that's kind of how that is. And we see it across all content or all of those grade levels. Those are all the same 3 critical areas. So we're going to do a task with that now. It's a healthy competition task. So we are going to count off so that we split up and our grade levels are kind of shifted around. And we are going to create infographics for the progression of the critical areas. So one group will be working on how do whole numbers progress from 3rd to 4th to 5th. One will work with fractions and decimals, and one will work with geometry. When you're creating the infographic, I really want you to think about some of these. If you were using that in your building to kind of help your teachers, or if you're using that to help parents, right? So someone who's even less familiar perhaps with the content and what happens inside school buildings sometimes, how are you going to show them using a simple infographic how those skills progress and what those expectations are and how they build on one another? And so I'm going to give you some chart paper. There are some markers in your bucket. And within your groups, you can talk about how that looks. How can I represent that on an infographic so that I can then share that information? Think about it as if it were a poster in a building and you wanted new teachers or even veteran teachers that needed some refreshers to think about the progression that happens across those grade levels, because it is very important to live outside of our grade level. What we do sets students up for success in secondary. We are a large part of the graduation rate, and so we really need to own that. And it's, I think, sometimes very difficult to own our part of that, because we also know we're in a testing, like national testing kind of like fever, right? I might need to edit that out, but it's true. And so it's really hard to balance, I know they have to take this test and pass, versus what skills do I really need to give them so they'll be able to graduate. And I think those look different sometimes. And so we have to think about always keeping in mind, it's important for us to know the progression. And in this room, we really should know some of that secondary 6th and 7th grade stuff, because the strategies that I'm using in my classroom are going to impact their ability to do their 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade work. And so we really need to think about that. I also think that we're making a good move in that area. So Carl is our secondary math specialist, and he's doing a lot of good work with his middle school staff of trying to incorporate some of this workshop model as well, and incorporate some of those, let's use some models to build understanding and bring some of the stuff that we're doing up so that it continues. Because we think a lot of times when we get in these upper grades that we no longer need to do some of this stuff, right? And that we can move straight into abstract and students will have it. But that is not always the case. And so thinking about how will I help someone understand the progression so that we know what came before so that I can build on it, but also so I know what's coming after so I can build in the right way so that they will then have the skills to continue building that and not getting so stuck in my grade level, which I think is really, really easy to do, especially in math. So that's what you're going to think about. We're going to count 1, 2, 3s.
1, 2, 3.
1,
2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1.
Okay, 1s are going to come over here, and I'm going to bring you whole numbers. 2s are going to come over here, and I'm going to bring you some chart paper for fractions and decimals. And 3s can head back in that area, and I will bring you a chart paper for geometry. And then you can kind of move around. You can put it on the floor, you can put it on the table, however you choose. And think about creating that infographic and what that progression might look like. So what we're going to do next is we're just going to kind of take a look around at the posters. This one, that one. In your bucket are dot stickers. You just need 1 per person. If any group is super opposed to having stickers added to their chart, speak now. And you're just going to kind of walk around the room and think about if you had to use one of these charts to help someone understand the progression of the standards, which one of these would you use? And you're going to put your dot sticker on 1. You cannot vote for your own. So you're going to take your dot sticker, go ahead, walk around to all of them. Once you place your sticker, you can come back to your seat. Okay, so I'm going to leave these up. When you guys go to lunch, I'll put them all in one place so you can kind of take some pictures if you want to, or you want to reference it or whatever. If you don't, that's fine too, but they will be there. We spent a lot of time already this morning looking at those critical areas and what they are. So what I want to do next is take a moment to think about how I can best support instruction within those areas in my class. So I'm going to go back to the math overview. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take a look at the CPA model of instruction. CPA is concrete, pictorial, abstract. It is part of our common instructional framework in Cabarrus County, so it's an expectation in math classrooms that we use this approach. And the reason we do that is the same reason when children begin to read, they do not begin with books that have words. So when I taught my personal children how to read, they started with picture books, right? There's no words on the page. They can still tell the story. They can understand it, and they're using visual cues. And then we begin to introduce letters and sounds and all that stuff. Math looks the same way. So in math, our manipulatives are kind of that visual thing to help me really understand what's happening before I move into the abstract. The first thing before we really do any activities is there's a link right there for CPA Mathematics Instructional Approach. It is just a quick overview of those 3 pieces, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a foldable to help us kind of think about and remember what those stages look like. There is large paper in the middle of your table and scissors and markers. Your foldable will look something like this. So if you fold your paper not quite in half to leave a flap to fold over, each of these flaps would be one of the stages: concrete, pictorial, abstract. I folded mine slightly less than that. It's okay. And then inside, I got kicked off. That's okay. If you open up the article, the inside of your foldable is going to kind of match what you notice in the article. So you're going to include inside a visual representation as well as just a quick little definition, something to remind you of what that stage looks like. And I would use this information to do that. And so when I click on that link, it will eventually open into a little overview of that approach. So it's going to tell you what the concrete stage is, give you a visual image of what that might look like, and that's what you're putting in your foldable. So on the inside flap, you can put the visual representation, and then on the other side, under here, I put mine on both on this, but you do not have to do that. You can put kind of some little definition, bullet points, whatever it is that you need. So however that looks to you is fine. So that you remember. And it's really just to help you kind of look back and think about this approach to instruction. So I would take a moment, I would just read over it. It's very short. Get an idea of what these stages really mean and how they work with one another. I'm going to give you about 3 to 5 minutes to create the foldable, and then we're going to do an activity using the CPA instructional approach. Okay, so I wanted you to be able to have that foldable, one, because we know that when, just like our students, when we write things down, we retain them better, and two, just as a reference point later, and to become a little bit more familiar with what this approach is. So why is that the approach that we chose in Cabarrus County? Well, if you look at the screen, and those 1, 2, 3, 4 images, does anyone know which one is a number and which one is a letter? No, right? So those are Hindi numbers and letters. And that's the same thing that works for children. If I show a child the number 5, it really just looks like some straight lines and some squiggly lines. And I do not know what that line means until someone teaches me that it's a representative of the number of objects, right? And so thinking about how we develop that understanding, we don't just start with it. Just like if you go back to the example I gave with picture books, I didn't just start with letters. I started with building some understanding first and then making connections. If I ask a child which number is larger, 3 and 5/10, or 3 and, I can't read my, 1 and 389 thousandths, most students are going to say 1 and 389 thousandths, and you probably already know that because there's more digits. So they automatically think that's the bigger number. In 3rd through 5th grade, which is you guys, if I ask a student which is larger, 1/8 or 1/4, you know that in the beginning a lot of them will say 1/8 because it has an 8, not a 4. And so we use the concrete pictorial abstract approach so that we can build that conceptual understanding. So they know why, even though 8 is bigger, 1/8 is really smaller. And so a lot of students are getting too little of the concrete and the pictorial. We're moving into abstract and moving quickly into abstract, and we're not living long enough where we need to. So what I want to do is I want to kind of take a look at the new standards. If you haven't seen them yet, you will be soon. Many of you probably have. And I want to think about how the standards may have changed, or what changed with them, or how they're worded, so that how do they align with CPA? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to split into grade levels. We're going to go to different chart paper that I have around the room, and there is a standard on there. I want you in your grade level, some of you have some familiarity with that already, how that standard may have looked last year, and take a look at the new standard and think about how it can take into account, how does it take into account the CPA model, and how does it support instruction of that. So this is just kind of a dialogue for the next piece of the activity. When you do this, however, there is half sheets of white paper on your table, or even if it's not a half sheet, if you want to rip some of those whole sheets in half, there should be half sheets in your bucket. I need you to take one of those and something to write with you as you dialogue. And then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do about that in a moment. So as you head over there, I want you to think about, I'm going to look at that standard and I'm going to think about what do I notice about the standard in general. I'm also going to think about how does that standard support a CPA model in my classroom, and then how does that affect me as I plan for and implement teaching of that standard. Okay? Any questions about that before we move? Okay. So this chart paper will be for my 5th grade friends. This is 4th grade, and over here is 3rd grade. I tried to give you a bit more space because you guys are going to have a few more people. So based on that discussion that you just had, I'm thinking about just general noticings about the standard, as well as how that standard could potentially support the CPA approach. On your paper, you're just going to jot down one key takeaway. It can be a question you still have. It can be something that you noticed. It can be a comment that was made that was like, oh, that's a great, like, this is how I know it supports CPA. Just kind of one takeaway from what the whole conversation on your paper. And after you write that down, and I'm sorry we're standing to write it, the reason we're standing is because you're going to do an activity at the chart paper immediately next. So rather than come back and go, I just didn't do that. So it's just a thought from the conversation, a question that you still have. Just jot that down. When you're done, if you take a glance at me, I'll tell you what we're going to do with that paper. Okay, so what you're going to do with this is we're going to do something called a snowball share. So again, this is a strategy that I tried to think about what could you use in your classroom. If you've done this already, you already know. So what you'll do in a moment, not yet, is you're going to crumple your paper up to create a snowball. And we're going to toss it around the room, and you're going to get a new snowball. Now, the reason this is so great for a classroom is that, one, it gives everyone an opportunity to communicate, even if you're not someone who's comfortable communicating orally. It also does not label anyone's response to a name. So if you're when we share out, you're not sharing your own idea, so you don't have to be nervous about that, and no one knows whose idea that is. So it kind of gives this freedom of, I'm going to be able to communicate and share my ideas and look at other people's ideas, but in the safety net of no one really knows who said what. So it frees up a lot of it for those students that are less willing to do that otherwise. So we're going to go ahead and crumple it up and toss it in some other direction and find a new one. And then once you find your new one, if you head back to your seat with it, that'd be great. So kids think it's hilarious, right?
I did this in my class last year.
Yeah.
Test prep.
Yeah. Once you go back to your seat, I want you to unroll the one that you found and just read over that for a moment. If you chose or you ended up with one that you think has something that would be valuable to the group, something that was interesting, something that maybe confirmed what you were thinking, I would like for you to share that out. So does anyone have one that you read that you thought this would be great to share with everyone? Mm-hmm.
It was a question. How can you use manipulatives when working with decimals? Like what kind of manipulatives would you use?
Okay, that's a super good question.
Well, mine has an answer.
Okay, good.
This one says, like for decimals, you can use money because kids are familiar with money and how they can do like bills and coins to have like a connection that they are used to.
Okay. Does anyone else have experience with manipulatives that support decimal use? So base 10 blocks are another way that you can actually support decimal use. If you make the flat the whole, then the rods become 1/10 of the whole, and the individuals become 1/100th of the whole. So it doesn't really move you into thousands necessarily, but by the time students have that concrete understanding of tenths and hundredths, they can usually expand into thousands without the support of the concrete. So thinking about that, right? That was a great question. Anything else that someone noticed that? Mm-hmm.
This one just talks about how the 3 stages help break down a more complicated, complex standard into doable and understandable stages.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anything else? So you'll also notice, like we said before, a lot of these standards now include the actual words. So I'm going to model, and I'm going to draw, and in all grade levels, and we see it across all grade levels and all of those substandards, that the state is really trying to support this approach because we know that research shows that this is the way that children learn. And it's the way we learn too, right? We see the concrete first before we move into something that is abstract. So what we're going to do next is you're going to be thinking about all of those things. You're going to be thinking about the 3 steps in the CPA model. You're going to be thinking about this particular standard. You're going to be working with your grade level group. You're obviously going to teach the standard at some point this school year. And so on the chart paper, you're going to create, how would I do this in my classroom at a concrete stage for those students that need it? How would it look as I move into pictorial? And then what would be abstract for them? And so you're going to represent those 3 stages for this particular standard on the chart paper to share out with the rest of the group. And I'm going to give you guys about 10 minutes to do that because I really do want you to think about it. You are going to be doing that. And so if you already have some kind of ideas and we leave today with at least one standard and one really great example, then you'll be able to apply that more within all of your other standards. So I'm going to give you a bit of time. This one is not a competition. There is not prizes for this one. But still, that'd be great if you do a great job. So you can go ahead and go to your grade level chart paper and be thinking about how does that standard look in those 3 stages. Whichever brave soul would like to go first would be awesome.
I will go first.
Okay.
All right. So our standard was adding and subtracting whole numbers up to and including 1,000. So we decided our concrete would be the foamy, like the block things. Yeah, that they can't break apart because if you're trying to make 100 of Unifix cubes, that would take forever. And one kid would make like 99 instead of 100 and mess it all up. So this way, and then when you have to borrow, they're having to actually be like, well, I can't borrow, so what do I do? So they're having to think through taking 100 and breaking it into 10 tens. So we thought that was really good. And then when we got to the pictorial, we were talking about still carrying over that same concept of the hundreds, tens, and ones, but carrying it with expanded form so that they were seeing it. So that's what we did for that. And then abstract would just be standard form, like subtraction and addition.
Great.
You think good.
Okay.
Okay. We had, for 4th grade, I was talking about multiplying fractions, and we said for the concrete that we would have them either use fraction bars or Unifix cubes just to see the different fractions compared to a whole. And then for pictorial, we said we would have them draw like the circle graph or whatever representation they could use that would best show like the unit fraction and the whole. And then once they got to the abstract, they would actually be like using the numbers and the digits to solve the problem.
Okay.
Alright, so we had solving real world problems with decimals. We really like the money idea, but you can still use it with the base 10 blocks. So we would start them off giving them either a certain random amount or an amount they kind of sift through and find. And once they get comfortable kind of using those manipulatives, they come up with their total, and they'll say, I have 170. And then once they kind of have the concept, the abstract is giving them a word problem where you can do a lot of things with that. But in this case, we decided to use a word problem that used a fraction. They were adding a fraction of a tenth, or you can use a fraction of a fifth to their problem to say, like, we're going to add 2/10 to this. So they have to know, okay, well, 2/10 of a dollar, okay, that's 20 cents, and then kind of add that to their total.
Okay. So you can wander back to your seats. I do want to point out before we move on a couple things. So if you look in the Canvas course, there's a chart from modeling to algorithms. I think it's important to note that we often think that students have to have mastery and proficiency with an algorithm by the time they leave us. And that is not always the case. So if you look at the chart, really it's about building understanding with models. And the only things that really they master at the elementary level are by 4th grade, we expect proficiency with an algorithm for addition and subtraction of whole numbers. And then by 5th grade, multiplication of whole numbers. So those are really the only things that we expect a proficiency with an algorithm of. So that kind of changes sometimes how we think and how we instruct as well, because the expectation is really within all those other things. When we're adding and subtracting fractions and we're multiplying fractions and dividing fractions and those things, we're really still building understanding with models all the way through the elementary level. And so that's something that I think we need to keep in the back of our minds as we plan for instruction. The other pieces, I like what this group said over here when they were talking about the overlap. And so it's not necessarily I'm doing some concrete activity and then next the pictorial, but it's really the overlap. In order to get them to move between stages, I have to show the connection between the stages. So students are going to live in concrete until they're ready to move out of concrete, and you'll know, because they'll be able to do that without your help. They'll know, I'm going to go get this manipulative, and I'm going to do it this way, and I'm great, and I've done it consistently for many, many times. And to get them to move into pictorial, they should still be using those manipulatives, and then as they're looking at them, draw what they did, right? So simultaneously until they no longer need that piece, and I can just draw it now even if I don't go pick it up. So those stages really overlap, and they do that in all of those cases. So when I'm living in pictorial, that's going to overlap once I move into abstract, right? I'm going to kind of show, here's the picture you drew, and here's what it really represents, until they no longer need the picture. So we also want to think about it that way. We are all overlapping. We've spent a lot of time this morning talking about what matters, what is a critical area, what approach are we going to use, but really we all know that another piece to this is structure and organization. It does not matter how well I know my critical areas or how well I know an approach to use. If I don't have the right structure, it falls apart, right? I learned that the super hard way. Every single year I taught, I had to change something I was doing because it didn't work, because it was a different group of kids. Some of my kids were great at rotations. Some of my kids were not and I had to do choice boards. Some of my transitions were awesome because my kids thought it was really funny to dance in between stations. Some of my groups were more mature and felt ridiculous and didn't want to do it. And so part of it is if I don't have the right structure, nothing else works anyway. The other piece is how do I introduce the structure? So I can't go into my math classroom and immediately day one have a running math workshop and pull guided groups, right? That doesn't work. So I think a really big piece of it is you guys have had experience in student teaching, you've had experience last year, you've had experience in your own world as a student on what worked and what didn't work, and you kind of have some time to reflect and think about what do I need to change, what do I need to be prepared for, what do I know I need to be proactive about because, bless you, because we see it often, and we're going to spend some time right now thinking about that. The way we're going to do that is a couple different things. So I'm going to go over all of them with you, and I'm going to give you some time. So I have a thing link. If you haven't created a thing link before, they're very easy to make. All you do is you hover over the image, and these pop up, and they all go to something. In mine, they are all images, but they can also be videos, articles, etc. This is great in the classroom if you want your students to be exploring something, whether that be in math or science or social studies or ELA or whatever, and you want them to be doing some research, but you want it controlled. I don't want them to just go Google and find whatever. So I, as a teacher, have already went in, found the resources, and embedded them. So in thinking about instruction, it's a great way to do that. All of these relate to kind of some of that scheduling. How many groups am I going to see? What is my daily schedule going to look like? How are they going to transition? How do my students know the expectations for transition? And also the expectations, if I'm in a group, do they know the expectations when they're working independently? So that's going to work with that. The other piece you're going to have a chance to look at are some planning documents. These talk about just kind of some different templates that help you get in, keep you on track. So I know when I was in the classroom, if I did not have something in front of me, I did not follow my plans ever. Meaning, I could have all the intentions to pull these 3 different people because I need to see them, but I get so caught up in one that I never got to the rest. Or I'd have this great intention of I had already thought of it, that's great manipulative, but by the time I got there the next day or the next week, I've forgotten I never pulled it, right? So this is just kind of if you're a person like me and you need some guidance in your own life, right? So I always created PowerPoints back in the day when that was a thing, but it was for me, it wasn't for my students. This piece, if you go to page 8, this is our Common Instructional Framework. If you're not familiar with that, I would like you to be, and you're going to be when you go to trainings in your buildings. I want to point out the difference, though. So if you go to page 8 specifically for this activity, it's going to give you some options that we thought of that you might want to consider when you're thinking about how am I going to group my class and how many times am I going to see each group and what do they need. This is not the only options you have by any means. This is just to get you thinking one. So if I just really need a starting place, because sometimes you just need a place to start your thought process and someone to talk about, this is where you can look. You can think of something different, something better, something that works more in your classroom that's not on here, and that's fine too, but I just wanted you to have that resource. The final thing in this section is the week of inspirational math. If you're not familiar with that, it is worth taking a look at. If you click on the image, it takes you to a PowerPoint. They are also linked in curriculum documents this year, so every single grade levels, Unit 1 has links in Stage 3 to the week of inspirational math. This is a great resource for setting kind of a good building of a community, building a good math community, making students feel comfortable in the math class. It already has videos that are done, lessons that are written to help you support that. For each grade level, you can kind of think about, does it fit what I want, does it not? If it's week 1, doesn't mean you have to use it first and week 2 second. You can kind of think about that too. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a good bit of time here, about 20 or 25 minutes, to look through all those thing links and kind of look at those planning documents, play around with the week of inspirational math. But as you do that, on your table there's a sheet that has ahas, confirmations, and question columns. And I kind of want you to jot some things down in there because we're going to be doing something with that. And if your column is blank, it's going to be a little more difficult for you to participate. Ahas is just like, oh, I didn't know that. Aha, right? Confirmation, I already knew that. This confirms everything I already thought. That's exciting. And a question. So some questions that arise as I look through these that I need to consider or think about. This does not need to be a silent activity. You can look at it independently. You can ask questions at your table. You can discuss. That is up to you. I'm going to give you 20 to 25 minutes to look at all of those things, kind of think about what helps you the most, what questions it brings up, how it aligns with what you already are thinking or already know about your classroom. Okay, so you've had some time to take a look over those resources and make some notes on your paper. What we're going to do now is we're going to do a mingle to share. So in a moment, you're going to stand up. And you are going to find somebody in the room that is not at your table, and you are just going to talk about the very first column, any ahas that you had looking through those resources. And you are both going to kind of have some opportunity to share and have some dialogue about those. So just that first column. Does that make sense? Okay. So try and find someone not at your table, because I know we had discussion at our table, and I want to expand that to other grade levels now. So you can go ahead and stand up. Based on looking at all of those resources as well as the conversations that you had with the people that you spoke to as you worked through your ahas, confirmations, and questions, we are going to do an individual activity next. So this is the hardest part of all days for me. Anything that requires me to keep my mouth shut, you guys will learn about me, I'm really bad at. So I usually ruin like silent dialogues. I'm really bad at being silent. But this is going to be kind of just take a moment individually. In the buckets, you have packages of sticky notes. What you're going to do with those is that first step. So thinking about what do I need to consider when I begin to implement Math Workshop. Because like we said before, I'm not going to walk in on day 1 or day 2 of school or even week 2 of school and anticipate that my workshop is going to be running in the way it will be in a month. And so one idea per sticky note, just what do I need to consider? What are the things I need to plan for? What do I need to think about and have a specific protocol for ahead of time? And just jot each one individually in a sticky note and just kind of make your own individual stack of those ideas.
For a Math Workshop?
For Math Workshop, yep. The second step that we're going to do is as a table group, you're going to want to clear off some space and you're going to be creating groups with your sticky notes. So you're going to share out your sticky notes. You're going to look for commonalities, and the ones that have some type of commonality, you're going to group together, and you need to create a title for that group. So what is it that made you put those ones together? They're all about what? So you're going to share all of yours, create your groups, and then create some titles for your groups. It does not matter how many groups you have as long as you have at least 2. You could only have 2. You could have 7. But you do need more than one sticky note in the group for it to be a group, right? So otherwise it's an individual. So you're going to just collectively create some groups next. Okay, as you create those headings and those titles at your table, what you're going to do is you're going to input them into the Padlet. So one person at your table is the only one that needs to do it. You're going to click the plus sign in the Padlet, and it's going to open a title. You do not need to necessarily put your grade level or anything like that. Just put each title individually. So click a new plus sign for each of your titles or headings, and just add those headings into the Padlet. So that's all we're doing now. We're going to be looking for some commonalities that we see across grade levels and tables. Right, so what I want you guys to do is take a look at the Padlet. And I want to look at commonalities. So out of all the things that all the groups put, what things do you think could either be grouped together, or what things do you see multiple times? Grouping, right? Grouping. Materials. Organization. Okay. So I think if we stick with those 3, what we're going to do the next activity is we're going to count off into 3s, and we're going to focus on those 3 things. So groupings, organization, and materials. And what I want you guys to do is just kind of have a conversation. Either it can be, here's my ideas, here's what I've experienced, here's what I know works, or it might be, I need help with this, and our group does not have a better option. So we're going to list a question in here and open it up to everybody else so that it can guide the discussion. So this chart paper is going to be for our grouping people, which will be if you were a 1 before, you can be a 1 again and come to grouping. Our 2s, if you were a 2 before, you can be a 2 again, are going to come over and work on organization. And our 3s are going to come over here with your markers, and you're going to work on materials. One of those groups was a bit larger, so I'm just going to have a couple of you shift because I had a group that only had 3, and I think I had a group that had like 6 or 7, so I'm just going to shift those. Or maybe not. We counted off in 3, so that's probably not true. That was probably grade level. Edit that out. Okay, so 1s, 2s, 3s, and it's really just here's my ideas, here's our key points, or here's the things we still have questions about this particular part of implementing Math Workshop.
Whatever. Made more sense in my head.
Okay, so we're going to do the same thing we did with that CPA and just kind of have someone in your group or representative or someone kind of share out just a general overview of these are the points that we had or these are the questions we still have. We started over, I think, this way last time. So Josh and Sarah, you're the only 2 names I know right now. So does someone in your group want to start since I know your names?
Sure. So we were the grouping group. So we talked about like kind of starting off from a place of having data, which is always nice. And you know, it's a good foundational point, but we also talked about how that should not just be what you use, because sometimes your kids are going to change based on what you're teaching. Sometimes down to the lesson, sometimes down to the whole unit, and sometimes down to personality. Who you decide, oh, these 4s go well together. Sometimes they also hate each other, and so they should not be together. And you kind of have to use a judgment as an adult and as a teacher to put them in the right groups. Another thing that we kind of threw in there was even though your groups may be turn talk kind of moment to have. The lower groups can learn from the higher students, and then individually, your high groups can be challenged as you meet with them one-on-one.
Anyone else?
I can go. So we had materials, which were very important. And the first one that popped into my head that I thought was most important was having a timer, not only for yourself, but for your kids, because I think kids really like to know how much time they have left to finish something. I know when someone stops me and I'm not finished, it makes me kind of mad. And a third grader, is going to get mad as well. And so seeing how much time, obviously manipulatives, having those easy to access technology, and including that in some way into your math. Spiral review, I think that's really important to have, continuing going back and reviewing what you have already covered, visuals, writing utensils, and we said that it was important for teachers to have notes on what student understood this concept, and maybe you need to go back because you think you're going to remember it, but then the next day you're like, wait, which one of them was it? Because you talked all of them. That's what we said.
We had organization, and we said that it's important to label and have a spot for all of your materials so that they're either accessible for you to pull out or for the students to get when they need them. And then to plan an account for all students when using manipulatives, so you don't want to have like a student that's left over and doesn't have anything if you want them all to have something, or if you're doing it with groups. We said use visuals for rotations in groups so that they can see where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there, and who they're supposed to be there with. And then the transition procedures, making sure that you're not wasting time running around the classroom or having conversations with your friends instead of like getting where you need to be. And that kind of goes with time management on the teacher's part, and then making sure that you plan ahead so that you're ready for what's coming during the day.
So I'm going to also put these up and leave them for you together at some point. At this point, you can head back to your seat. We have one additional thing that we're going to work on before we break for lunch. And taking all of those things and any lingering questions and all of the information that we have worked on this morning. And if you got my email, awesome, about headphones. If you didn't, that's okay. We didn't have headphones yesterday, and it's just got concentrate, gets a little loud. That's okay. We're going to do a little bit of video analysis next. So thinking about what really should successful implementation of a math workshop look like, and what are all the pieces that I should see in my classroom. And so I have some video links. As you look at these video links, there is a sheet on your table called AEIOU. It is a spotlight on strategy. I always want to say that really weird because it seems like it should be a spotlight on strategy. I don't know. So these all come from DE. I know that we do not use DE the same way, but there are a ton of these strategies. And if you go and look on them, they break them down by what it is you want the students to be able to know at the end, and then give you different strategies that support that particular concept. You can kind of click around into which ones you want to watch. There is one that is the longest. It is 10 minutes. The rest of them are between 1 and about 3 or 4 minutes, so a little bit shorter. You will have access to them later as well as today. But what you're going to do is, as you're watching, you're just going to jot some things down on this sheet, following that key at the top. So A is any adjectives, words, or things that describe what you see as you look at the videos. Your E would be emotions. So how's it making you feel as you watch it? Something interesting for I, an O, and then U would be those lingering questions again. That's going to kind of help guide our afternoon together. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend about we're going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes living here. We can spend longer if you would like to once we get into it. And just clicking around and giving you an opportunity to listen to these videos. I will say that as you watch the videos, I want you to also think about the fact that these might not be exactly what you want to do. So it might be that in some of these videos you notice something happens and you're like, oh, I hope that doesn't happen in my room. Like, I wonder what I could do to be more proactive so that I don't have that happen. So it's not so much that you're looking to emulate the videos, it's just looking to get you thinking about what it looks like and what you need to consider as you plan. So I hope that makes a bit of sense as well. So I'm going to give you guys until around 11:10 to work in here and see what you come up with, and then if we need longer, we'll take longer. Okay, as a table group, I just want you to take a few minutes to just have a quick discussion, share out some of those things that you noticed in the videos, questions you may have had, perhaps something that someone at your table agrees with or has a suggestion for, something you saw that you thought, I don't really want it to look that way, and so what ideas do you have about being proactive in preventing it? Or maybe something that was like, I've never seen that before, I really want to try that, or maybe it's something that just confirms I've already done that, or I've seen someone do that, and I know that it's great practice, and I'm going to continue to try and implement that in my classroom. Is there anything that any table came up with that you just really want to share, or like a super burning question you want answered now based on not just these videos, but kind of like up until this point of the day? Okay. So what we're going to do prior to going for lunch is we're going to do some role playing. That either makes you really happy or really sad, depending on who you are. And we are all going to be working from a 4th grade lesson plan, and that is okay, even though if you're not a 4th grade teacher, because like I said, we kind of need to understand progression anyway. You're going to be working in Unit 3 of 4th grade on this standard. What I'm going to tell you you're going to do is each group is going to have a particular piece of the math workshop to plan out, and then we're going to like role play it for real. So just be prepared for who wants to be like the teacher or the students and who's really comfortable with that and who's not and all of those kinds of things. Is it the whole group? Is it 1 or 2 of you that present, but everyone's working on it? So think about that. You have 2 resources that I really want you to look at. So the Teacher Resource Canvas course is where you can access that unit plan and kind of look at the resources. In doing that, I did want to point out some changes to how the units look if you're already familiar with how Cabarrus County did them. If you're not, how they look, just so you know. So when I go in here, if I go to 4th grade, and I go into my math curriculum tab, when I get into my year-long maps, perhaps, oh, it might be this one that's open. It's not, but that's okay. This is a 4th grade example, it's fine. So the difference is stage 1 and stage 2 look really similar. When you get to stage 3, they look different than they did in previous years. So this is the new format of stage 3. It breaks it down into where we're getting this from. Is this a lessons for learning from DPI? Is it a fluency game? Did I grab it from Illustrative Math or Howard County? It's a work in progress, as you all know. The other piece you need to know from this is that since our standards changed, that doesn't mean that Illustrative Math and Howard County Math and Practice are going to change. Why? They're not going to do that for North Carolina when everyone uses them. So if this is listed as an MD4 on here, when you open it, it could potentially link to what is or was previously and still is Common Core's MD1, perhaps. So if we put a standard together, I need you to know that that title might not match, and you're really going to have to look at the activity. If it's linked in here, somebody else looked at the activity and believes that this color graph activity aligns with our MD4. But if you're doing it independently later and you're finding other materials, you need to know that, because outside of North Carolina, they're still obviously going to align to Common Core standards, and it's not going to match ours. And so you're going to have to be really careful about that. That's not going to change this year. That's going to be forever. So you're just going to have to be conscious of when you're choosing activities and looking up things if you're doing it that way. The other piece is, as you live in this, and this is kind of not related to what we're doing right now, but I just want to throw it out there because I have you here. As you live in this year, we changed this format based on teacher feedback and people saying, you know what, stage 3 really isn't helpful and it's really confusing and the format's weird and I'd rather just Google stuff because it's faster than me clicking around. So all of these are direct links instead of going into the drive, except for Howard County. Some of Howard Counties have to be put in the drive. As you work through this year, please give us feedback on if this format is good or not, because if it is, we'll continue, and if it's not, I need to think of something different, because I really want the documents to help you. It should be that you're not trying to find all this stuff. It should be it's here. You're just trying to figure out how to best implement it in your classroom or how to adapt it. And so that's the point of that. The other thing is any NCDPI links will for sure stop working around Christmas, potentially before then. I know that that is going to happen. I have a plan, but if you go into a unit around that time, bless you, and it's not working, just know I'm working on it. So I'm going to relink things, I'm going to fix everything, but I have to wait until they're done shifting over for me to be able to do that. So don't freak out when they stop working. I know it's coming. If you're familiar with NC Tools for Teachers, they've already kind of moved a bunch of stuff, and those links are not going to change. So if you haven't looked at that, you should. And if you have, that's a good place to go that they've already kind of realigned as well. The other piece that I want you to look at as you think about planning for this is back here. I think it opened a new tab, so. Okay. Yeah, I know that we already looked at the Common Instructional Framework, so I wanted to point out the pages that you talked about, Josh. So 6 and 7 in the instructional framework, 7 is for math, 6 is ELA, but they look very similar, is going to help you if you're in this group and you're thinking about, okay, what does that really look like? So if I am in a group and I'm planning the mini lesson for this, then this document tells you, okay, here's what it is, here's how long it should take, here's a description of those key points. If someone comes in your room, this is really what I want to see in a mini lesson. And then if I want more information, I can click the hyperlink and read that part of the Common Instructional Framework specifically. So when you begin to look at planning your piece for this, those resources are linked in there for you. Okay? So what we're going to do is using that particular teaching point and that particular standard, this table right here is going to create a mini lesson. I'll put it back up. I keep getting kicked off. I don't know why. This table is going to create a quick mini lesson for that standard. If it comes back up. I hope so. Otherwise, I'll write it somewhere. You guys can create a teacher-led small group, just one. So if I was having a small group and this is the standard I was covering in that small group, what could that look like and what would I do with that small group? This table is going to create an activity that students might be able to do during independent practice that would support that standard. And then this table is going to come up with how would I close that lesson? What would closure look like? What would the share look like at the end of the day if that was what my objective was for the day? Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes right now. When we get back from lunch, we're not going to actually role play till after lunch because I want you guys to have time to really plan it out. I really do want you to think about what it really would look like and what would make it, what it would be an exemplar in a classroom. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes doing this, planning it, kind of thinking about preparing, looking at the resources, etc., reading through the Common Instructional Framework for that particular section. Then we're going to do a quick little wrap up before lunch and we'll head to 12 or maybe slightly before.